We got more unmarried couples are buying homes together. What to know before you do. This comes from CNBC. And that unmarried couples make up 18% of all first-time home buyers for the first time. And this is up from 4% in 1985.
Well, it doesn't get any more creative than that. I mean, finding creative solutions, finding creative situations. I mean, that right there nails it right there perfectly. And what I like about it, I mean, it's just another form of house hacking. And I mean, you're already living with the person, maybe renting a place. You guys maybe both have pretty good salaries. I think this is a very good example, and I think it's very awesome that people are doing this because A, it lets you get into a house, build some equity, know what it is to have the responsibility. 2, it lets you know if you even like living with this person on a long-term commitment. So it's like killing two birds with one stone.
Yeah. And what's funny is I actually wrote down further in the notes, I'm like, Brian's been talking about this for weeks.
I'm like, right off the bat, it sounds like ding, 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 ding.
It says almost half unmarried. So 46% made financial sacrifices, including picking up secondary jobs to finance their purchase. And this is exactly the house hacking you've been talking about in a number of different settings, off and on camera and off camera. But this is that exact same thing where people are making those sacrifices, doing the extra thing, or coming up with creative ways to get into housing. Just so you're not jealous, I want to let you know on camera, Mikey did offer and extend to me to buy a house together before you did. So I'm going to have to go and qualify with him first.
Sorry about that. All right, no worries. Can I do yours, Linda?
Yes. You can leave it alone. So, Mikey, talk to me. You just had a birthday recently. So is this something that people in your age category are actually considering? I know the numbers are saying one thing, but tell me what's happening in the circles of your friendships and the people you're hanging out with. Are they talking about the same thing too?
Yeah. So I actually do know a few couples who are unmarried that have, brought this to my attention. Hey, we want to possibly purchase together. And the way I see it, it's no different than, just bringing an extra co-borrower onto your file to, maybe qualify for more, just have more income, maybe better credit, things like that. So, I mean, to me, it's no different.
Yeah. One of the things I know that this article talks about is first of all, they're talking about this combined average income that they're using of this survey. And they were saying that the average combined income together was $72,500. My initial note was not in California.
Where?
I mean, that does not fly. That does not correlate with what we know our affordability indexes here in California. Yeah. But obviously, I think obviously in other places this is probably going to do. But there are some things I think people need to be considerate of when doing this. And this jumped out at me was that there are often no legal protections they can fall back on. And if one person decides to leave, the other can be saddled with the entire mortgage and may not be able to afford it. This makes me think of credit problems and having lates on your credit, and then also maybe being unable to afford it if that doesn't really work or dissolves.
So one counter argument that I had for that is that I feel that there's more financial solutions when you buy and you're not married than when you're married. Because when you're married, now you have to either split the equity, sell the house. Maybe you can't even get your profits back because you got a short sale or whatever the reason may be. But when you rent it with somebody else, you guys have the flexibility of having certain agreements put in place beforehand to know, hey, if anything ever hits the fan, this is what we already agreed to before we took the responsibility to make sure that if this situation arises, we already are protected.
So you'd be wagering that, let's say you did this with somebody else and that person said, hey, I got to bail. I don't want to do this no more. You're wagering that you'd be able to fill that spot with a stranger or someone else who'd be looking to also have you as a co-owner or a co-inhabitant?
That, or you can rent the house out if it makes sense. You could turn it to short-term rental. I feel like you could do a lot more with the situation than divorcing, because if you go to divorce, it does cost you to get into court.
Yeah, I'm not saying in the married situation. I'm saying in two unmarried people that own a house. Let's say you and I both own this house. And I'm like, Brian, I'm out of here. Now you're saddled with the mortgage like the article's talking about. Then you're saying you have confidence that you could either rent out the remainder of the house that now I was occupying, but I'm not, or you could just flee altogether and just make the entire thing into an investment.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, I know one of the challenges that comes up with this is title. I know one of the other things that came up in the article too is well, hold on, if you're both on title, well, now one person might have bailed, but you're still sharing that responsibility and that ownership. And again, back to the credit situation, if I default on you or I stop paying, that'll hurt me because I'm on credit, but that's going to hurt you too.
Yeah, of course.
So what do we do about that? What are your suggestions, guys?
Yeah, so I'm actually glad you brought that up, Andy, because I did want to ask you guys, just to address your point of maybe there being credit issues if one person falls out, is what do you guys think about, maybe going into title with right of survivorship, ownership is equal, tenancy in common? What's your take on that?
I think it comes down to the commitment of the friendship or the relationship. If it is, I understand people buy houses because they're going to get the house before they get married, and some people forego actually having a wedding and they just put that money towards having a house. So I've seen that in my own personal experience as well. So I think it really comes down to the reason and what really the future is forecasted to be, and if that is also a house you're going to stay in permanently, or you're saying 3 to 5 years, let's live here, and then as a group, the two of us or three of us, or will then convert it into an investment that we just hold in long term.
So
all that changes titling.
I had clients that did exactly just that. They bought back in a couple years ago, and then basically what they wanted to do is basically get into their job so that they could, grow that income over time, and then now they're able to turn that property that they bought into a rental, or take that equity and be able to then get a bigger house now that they have higher income. So I think it's very beneficial, but it really just comes down to if you trust the person and you know that it's not going to go sideways.
Yeah, I think intention means a lot, and also having some. I think this is probably one of the best things to do if someone's actually considering this, having this kind of conversation and go, okay, what is it we're doing here? What's the commitment? What's the time frame? What are our exit strategies if it doesn't work? What happens if? Look, as a married man, I have to have this conversation with my wife in the sense of what happens if I die and the income goes away? What happens if you die and the income goes away? That matters to that surviving person, married or unmarried. And
definitely.
It's kind of sucks to say it that callously. I'm talking about it so casually, but it is something you have to consider, especially if you have kids and that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
But in this situation, the same kind of rule applies. If that just happens, what would help provide provision to the remaining person to be able to maintain ownership of the house? So I think that's something we got to think about. And they gave a couple suggestions here on things that should be considered by unmarried couples before buying a property. One of them was, maybe tapping into retirement accounts for down payment. I'm not a financial planner, so I don't know about that. You got the traditional IRA, Roth IRA, 401k stuff, and those have early withdrawal penalties in some cases. They have some tax consequences in others. I'm not going to get into that. We're not CPAs, and we don't do that. We got to review credit reports. You got to keep the credit activity low, and then save money. Save money somehow in order to make sure that for those rainy days or for those maybe those unthought of circumstances that occur, then the house is going to be in good standing. It doesn't go into default.
Yeah, and actually, guys, I was looking at it and it says save money in a high yield savings account. That actually caught my attention because I have one, and so anytime, whatever's in there right now, it grows at 5% a year, which is pretty high for that, to be honest. So that stood out as a really easy option for me too.
Yeah, and that's something we haven't talked about on the show a lot because we don't really interact with it here. It's not something we sell or we pitch,
Right.
But it actually is a positive outcome and consequence of the Fed.
It's a great hedge, as we're seeing.
Took advantage of it.
Yes, the CDs and the savings accounts are the returns are pretty okay.
They want your money.
Opened it at the right time.
Yeah, and depending on how you measure inflation, the current way or the old way, you may actually be making more in those types of accounts than inflation is costing you. So we can talk about that later, but I'm glad you brought that up, Mikey. So snapshot judgment, good idea, bad idea?
Purchasing with someone you're not married to?
Yeah, good idea, bad idea. Is there more upside or downside? What do you think?
Based off my experience, I'll say downside.
Okay, what do you think? Upside, downside?
I'm going to say it's a case by case.
Okay.
Case by case. If everything checks off and you're able to come to a mutual agreement, I think it may be a good situation because of the fact, like me, if I have another family that I want to live with, just to be able to, get together, save up some money, cool, we could do that. But I think it just depends on the circumstance.
I think it's upside when there are commitments already made that go down the road towards we're being married, we have a family, and we're already doing life together in that path. I definitely think it's downside when it comes to just an idea on a Saturday night that sounds good over a barbecue, and you try to go to do a loan app on Monday. That's the downside, and I think we should end with that.
Well, at least we all got a different perspective here.